Hello, crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yeepy for Yana episode. In today's video, I will show you how to combine heat embossing and hot foil stamping. Both of these techniques require heat, and one can damage the other if done in the wrong way. I'll show you how to create a flat Christmas greeting card with the Simon Says Stamp Snowflake Edges stamps, and I'll share loads of card making tips that I use in my card making every day. Let's get started. So here's a look at the stamp set I'll be using today to create my card. It's a stunning set. It's a larger 6x8 set filled with beautiful snowflake edges. You have one longer edge that can work even for slimline cards, and then some smaller edges as well as one corner as well. Now this stamp set also features some beautiful sentiments, giving you everything you need to start creating. So you have all the images you need to make a card. Now I wanted to have a slightly larger sentiment for the card that I had in mind, and I wanted a hot foiled sentiment for my card. I really love the look of hot foiling, especially on holiday cards, and whenever I can, I try to add some simple foiled touches. I picked a Glimmer hot foil sentiment from Spellbinders, and this sentiment comes from the Gifts of Christmas set, and it reads, "Family and friends are the true gifts of Christmas." My idea is to foil the sentiment in matte gold foil on a panel of Simon's soft navy cardstock, and then add snowflakes around the sentiment, framing it in white. Now, whenever you want to combine heat embossing and hot foiling, you have to save the embossing for the last step. The heat from the hot foil machine can reheat and remelt the embossing powder, messing up your hard work. The heat from the heat gun, on the other hand, will have zero effect on the hot foiling, so it is safe to heat emboss over a foiled panel. I want to foil the sentiment in the center of my panel. I need to cut a piece of foil for this, and for this I'm using Spellbinder's quick trimmer. You can also use a sharp pair of scissors, and that's what I usually use, but I couldn't find mine when I was filming and making this card, so I used the trimmer instead. Now the trimmer will give you a perfectly straight edge, and that is something that is rather helpful when using the hinge method when foiling. Now if you don't know what the hinge method is, you'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute. Now, in addition to the glimmer plate, the foil, and the paper you plan to foil on, you will also need some low-tech tape. I like to use Spellbinder's Best Ever Craft Tape for this, as it doesn't leave a sticky residue on the paper after it's been through the glimmer machine. Now, some low-tech tapes end up leaving a sticky mark on your paper after you've applied the heat to them. The adhesive in the tape can react to the heat from the glimmer machine. It can sort of melt and transfer onto the paper, leaving a sticky residue in the paper. And that can interfere with the process, as things could potentially stick to that sticky residue, and that's something that we'd rather avoid. So this yellow tape from Spellbinders, it doesn't have this problem. So that's one of the reasons I like to use it for my hinge method. Now, I like to tear a piece of tape long enough to create a sturdy hinge for the plate that I'm using. So I position the plate on the paper. I try to center it the best I can. And next, I use the tape to adhere the plate onto the paper like so. So I just run the tape along the plate, creating a hinge. This allows me to flip the plate away, then add a piece of foil onto the paper, and then flip the plate back into the original position. Now you can also try to align the plate with the foil already placed underneath the plate on your panel, but honestly, that never works for me. Even without the foil, I often manage to position things slightly crooked. So I try to find solutions that help me avoid this problem, because we all agree nobody wants to have a crooked sentiment on your card, right? So I then added another piece of tape to hold it all down, and I added it from the other side, and I brought this panel and the glimmer plate to my Glimmer hot foil system. Now my system is all hot and ready to go. All I need to do is press the timer button. I'm also adding my shims right away, and you can see that they are well used and well loved. I have lots of foil transfer on those. Now, I also always add a cardstock shim in between the plastic shims. This is something that I find I need to do for my die cutting machine, but you might not need to add a shim for your machine. Now, the hinge method is also helpful when you have imperfections in your foiling. Today, I am foiling on Simon's soft navy cardstock, which is not the best paper for hot foil stamping. It is great, thick, nice quality cardstock, and I love to use this paper for die cutting, for ink blending, even for stamping and coloring with colored pencils, but it's not the best for hot foil stamping. Now, I love the color of this paper, so I still try and make it work for hot foiling. I brought my Platinum 6 die cutting machine. I usually use the big Platinum, but that big Platinum is a little bit too big to fit in my camera frame, so I use the smaller machine for the video, and I've sent the platform through the machine to apply pressure and foil. When I peel the plate and foil off of the paper, you can see that my foiling is kind of far from perfect. Like I said, this paper is not the best for hot foil stamping, hence why the results aren't the best. But never fear, we can still make it work. I'm going to remove the overfoiling with the help of a dry paintbrush, and then also erase most of the foiling or overfoiling using a pencil eraser. Now keep in mind that the plate is still attached to the paper using that hinge. I'm not removing the plate, I am keeping it there on the paper. And there, now this looks much better. Now I also have underfoiling here, so I'm going to refoil this sentiment with a fresh piece of foil. Because I still have the plate attached to the paper with that tape hinge, I can be sure I'll pop it back in place and it will refoil exactly in the same spot. So that's the beauty of the hinge technique. And let's take a look. Beautiful, it foiled perfectly, and now I'm more than happy with the sentiment for this card. Now that the hot foil stamping is done and over with, we can work on the heat embossing part of this design. I'm using the Misty stamping tool, and I'm going to heat emboss the snowflake border above and below the sentiment in white embossing powder. So first, I align the snowflake edge on the panel. I treat the panel with anti-static powder. I need to make sure that I don't have any grease from my fingers on the panel. And since I did handle this panel a lot during the foiling process, I probably have lots of fingerprints on the paper. Next, I ink up the stamp with clear embossing ink, and I stamp it onto the paper, making sure that I have a very good impression. I'm using Simon's Detail White embossing powder and coating the stamping with the powder. You could actually just do the top part of the panel. That looks very nice, and you can skip doing the bottom if you wanted to. I used my heat tool and heat set the powder, and now I'm going to repeat the process and stamp the same snowflake edge on the second part of the panel. Once everything is heat set, I have a pretty snowflake background for this card. Now I also have quite a lot of that embossing anti-static powder on the background, and I can get rid of that using a pencil eraser. It erases no problem. Now, I try not to go over the foiled part too much with my pencil eraser, not to disturb the foil. At this point, you can keep your background as is, but I like to step things up, so I'm going to add some subtle shadows to the snowflakes. Recently, I shared this card on my blog where I heat embossed the printmaking houses from Simon on this same soft navy cardstock. If you look closely, you can see that the houses look somewhat dimensional. I achieved that look by adding shadows using Copic markers. So I'm going to do the same here with the snowflakes. I have the C7 Copic marker, and I'm going to draw shadows next to the heat embossing. Now, you can go darker if you want, maybe use a C9 or even a C10, but I didn't want the shadows to be too dark for this card. Now, this is quite a tedious process to add all of that shading, but I didn't mind. If you want, you can simplify this by re-stamping the same image over the heat embossing, but offset it slightly. This will give you that pretty drop shadow look. You just need to make sure to stamp it in watermark ink, and you'll get that beautiful shadow. Now, this shadow might not be as dark, but that's definitely another and easier way to achieve this look. Now, while adding the shadow with a Copic marker, I did accidentally colored over some of the white embossing. Now, this was bound to happen and nothing to worry about. With my coloring done, I used a Q-tip. I dipped it in the stamp cleaner. I have one from Simon Says Stamp. And then I gently went over the areas which I had accidentally colored gray. It removed the gray marker from the white heat embossing without any problems. Now, you don't want to rub it in too much. Be very gentle. Just carefully glide your Q-tip over the heat embossing. If you rub it too much, you might also dissolve the embossing powder. Okay, at this point, you can once again call your background done, but I wanted to step it up even more. I wanted to add some subtle ink blending around the edges, darkening them. Now, this helps to direct the eye to the center of the panel, to the sentiment. I used Hero Art's navy ink and then Simon's large ink blending brush and blended the navy around the panel. Now, the navy ink is just a shade darker than my soft navy background, so it added just a little bit of darkness to the edges. Now, it did color the embossing powder as well. You can see it no longer looked white, but I was able to clean that up by spraying a little bit of that same stamp cleaner onto a cloth and wiping the background with it. Just again, remember to be gentle. A very light touch is all you need here. With all of that done, I trimmed the panel down slightly, not too much, just about 1/8 of an inch from each side, and then I foam mounted the background onto an A2 white top folding card base. This gave me a faint white border around the design. I feel like that helped frame the design and made it look a bit more cohesive. I also embellished each of the snowflakes with gems. I used silver gems from Spellbinders. And lastly, I added lots of white, tiny white dots using a white Jelly Roll pen. I used number 10 pen from Sakura. I clustered most of the dots in between the snowflakes, just adding more white to the background of my card. So here's a look at the finished project that I have for you today, featuring both hot foil stamping and heat embossing. I hope you guys will give this idea a try. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!